Welcome to the Times of Industry show. I have a returning guest, Dan Kurz, DKAnalytics.com. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Leo.
So we're having this interview on a Monday, and this interview will air very, very shortly, so in a day or two. And everything we talk about here has to do with December. So we have Black Friday and Cyber Monday data coming out on December 1st. That's going to help us understand much about the consumer and what's going on in America. You have December 8th and 9th, the FDA approval for vaccines. Then you have December 11th, when a lot will be discussed about the budget and whether or not they have a budget for 2021 or a fiscal cliff. And then you have December 19th, which is basically the last day of Congress for 2020, and they either will have a stimulus plan or not. I want to ask you, because we have so much going on in December. First of all, what do you think about the election and everything that has to do with the lack of reporting on the media front in terms of how they try to shape reality for Biden on one hand, and then you see on alternative media a lot of what's going on behind the scenes with the Trump campaign? Because if you watch mainstream media, it's almost not acknowledged that there's still litigations going on, and it's reported like political theater. So for the people who don't follow this very closely like you do, can you elaborate on exactly what's going on right now?
I will do my best. This is a moving target. There's a lot of discovery going on. But let me start with two things. One thing we mentioned off mic, Leor, just to give people a flavor of just how much fraud has likely taken place in the recent election. In 2012, when Barack Obama was up for re-election, he ran against Romney. In the city of Philadelphia, where America was born, the Constitution was written, Independence Hall, Romney in 2012 did not get one single vote in any of the Philadelphia precincts. I can only say that the Democratic machine turned the election into a banana republic affair. That same thing writ large on a national scale, I believe, is happening today. That is, I don't think Joe Biden should be the designated president-elect. Here also, for a bit of flavor, if any of you by chance have ever followed how many campaign rallies Donald Trump conducted as he crisscrossed the country, sometimes showing up 2, 3, 4 times a day in 3 or 4 different cities, practically unannounced, often only with a couple hours of notice. This man had 20, 30, 40,000 people drop everything they were doing that attended his rallies. And this probably 3, 4, 5 dozen times. When Joe Biden decided to leave his basement, he ended up doing it maybe 3, 4 times. And some 200, 300 people showed up. Now, let me ask you, who you think got elected to be president of the United States?
In terms of, Dan, obviously we've seen these rallies. Nobody's saying that Trump has a fringe following. Obviously 70 million people plus have voted for Trump. But can you talk a little bit more about how this election, in your opinion, could be turned towards Trump? What sort of lawsuits and allegations are going on? There's backdating, the dead people, etc. Can you talk more specifics? What are the chances that this ends up being a second term for Donald Trump, as far as you know?
Well, I think it depends upon, to a significant degree, how many judges before which these lawsuits of massive voter fraud, whether, as you said, they're dead people, they're people that voted, there's people that didn't have signatures, or the Democratic machine refused to have signature comparisons, or people could vote beyond the 8 p.m. November 8th or November 3rd deadline, or For example, you couldn't have witnesses as to what went on. If you recall, if you took a look at the electoral map on November 3rd, you saw Trump leading in various key or swing states, so-called swing states, key states that are hotly contested but have a lot of elector votes. What happened in the aftermath was all of a sudden, in the dark of night, the Republicans in many of these Democratic stronghold cities went home, and lo and behold, the next day, all of a sudden, a lead of 300,000 or 50,000 Trump over Biden reversed. So the question here, I don't think, is has there been fraud committed or not? I think that's pretty clear. The question is, will these suits that want to do discovery and provide the evidence, as there's a lot of affidavits, hundreds and hundreds of affidavits are coming from people involved with the process. I mean, think of it this way, Leor, if you're not allowed to observe and they put up paper boxes or force you as a Republican to sit 60 yards away from where the votes are being tallied. I mean, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, it is a duck, and a duck is fraud, massive fraud. If these suits can go before court, then the question is, are those judges going to act politically, or are they going to act constitutionally? And ultimately, will the Supreme Court decide to act constitutionally instead of politically? In other words, Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution states that state legislatures have the final say in determining voters, that is, the electors that represent the voters' interests. And if John Roberts and other members of the court can be twisted or harangued or even threatened to act politically because the Pravda press media has determined that Joe Biden is president-elect without having a system of integrity to determine this result, then it's checkmate. So it's going to be in the hands, in my opinion, of the judicial system.
So we know
at the state and at the federal level. And if the judges really are in favor of transparency, and they also believe in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, that every citizen, regardless of party or color or what have you, be treated equally in front of the law, then Republicans get to observe, and they haven't been. They've been pushed aside. So this really, Leo, at the end of the day, is whether Americans have an election system that is fair, transparent, and doesn't take the franchise of legitimate voters and sells it down the river to people that are positioned in power and get the profit off of this mobocracy, or this, in essence, fascism that we have ongoing over here.
So obviously you're a strong Trump supporter. If like many other Trump supporters that believe that, one, there has been fraud, or two, that we will never know the truth, if Biden is going to be elected and it will be final, will you personally be expressing yourself in terms of like civil unrest, riots, anything? And what do you think about the 70 million voters, out of which many of them have said, we just reject the notion that Biden won. We don't care what the court system will even say. We know that Trump won, et cetera, et cetera. I'm asking because I want to know the mentality of what will happen in case Biden wins.
Well, there were some 74 million votes tendered or tallied for Trump. And recall what I said earlier, Trump was in a lead on election eve, and then all of a sudden they switched in some states, including Virginia. So actually, I don't think it's only 74 million. It's probably significantly higher. And conversely, Joe Biden's votes are commensurately lower. A large part of unraveling this fraud will be taking illegitimate votes away from him. The dead people, the people voting in multiple states, signatures not confirmed, votes beyond the deadline on November 3rd, 8 p.m., and so on and so forth. But yeah, there is a very large constituency. Look, I am a reluctant Trump supporter. I was a Ted Cruz guy. But if you compare Donald Trump and what he's done, as wrong as he's been, wrong-headed, in my opinion, on trade, on government spending, he's a big spender, right? Donald Trump used to be a Democrat before he turned into a Republican. His trade policy was smacked of Hooverism in a negative sense. His spending is prolific. It brings us even more government and more bureaucracy. The more government spends, the bigger it gets. And he's also into printing money and yield deprivation. All those things conspire to entrench crony capitalism, which has become fascism, as you saw with Pfizer releasing the vaccine results after the election instead of before, which would have helped Trump. But I think the gut level of many American states says that Trump is the legitimate president, at least for them, and not Biden. And as much as the left or the Democrats refuse to see Donald Trump as their president and fabricated all these fake Russian and Ukrainian hoaxes, in this case, there's a legitimate reason for Trump voters to feel disenfranchised because of the massive voter fraud. And also, let me repeat it just once. You said it, you saw it yourself. You cannot just ignore the fact that when Trump went out and spoke 4 or 5 dozen times, he had massive rallies on the shortest notice, and Joe Biden couldn't get 200 to 300 people to show up. I mean, that just is a very, very strong indicator of really who is the legitimate president, in my view. What will people do? Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing locally. I'm getting together with some people. I'm putting pressure on my state representatives to make sure that Florida is luckily still a red state, which means a constitutional state. You know, they got the colors mixed up. A red state really is a communist state, and a blue state, you should be blue as virtue is true. But never mind the colors, they're mixed up. We got to go with what's established. But in Florida, we don't have that problem. But I have friends in other states, including Maryland and Virginia and Nevada, that are writing their representatives to stand tall for the legislature's role in determining what constitutes legitimate votes, and to put pressure on their representatives and not to their senators. Specifically in Florida, that's not so necessary because Florida clearly voted for Trump and Republicans. As far as what else I'm doing at the very local level, I'm putting a big effort into freeing my daughter of a mask that she has to wear that deprives her of oxygen, that causes her to inhale CO2, and that causes her to, in essence, create a greenhouse for bacteria growth right on her face every day, 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. And this, you know what, Leor, I call it the coronacrats wanting to shut down the economy for a virus that is trumped up way beyond the threat that it really poses to 99% of the people, or the vast majority, where 99.8% get it and recover and then have the herd immunity to help put this virus down completely. So I think this issue and this virus and other things are tyrannical efforts by selling safety fraudulently that the left is using to, in essence, kill the remnants of freedom and free market capitalism we have. And I think a lot of people know what's going on. And I hope, God do I hope, we see signs, Leor, for example, a local restaurant chain. You've got Huntington Beach, California beachgoers. You have Buffalo businessmen. They are starting to resist this COVIDocracy by the coronacrats of, in essence, shutting down their businesses, putting them into bankruptcy, ruining Main Street and small business, and allowing big business to come out shining like a rose, smelling like a rose, which is all part and parcel of the rising fascism that this country faces, where big government is in bed with big business. And that's where we're going. And I think there's quite a few people waking up, and hopefully enough to make a difference and pull it back in the direction of freedom and free market capitalism.
Well, let me ask you this. Why go through the trouble of trying to mitigate these very different points of views? Why aren't why isn't America just getting separated to different states? Obviously, there's so many different ideas. Why even try to work? What's the added value of trying to stay together as 50 states that have so difference of opinions? One wants small government, constitutional, etc., etc. The other part, I don't even know what they want, but it's what is it that keeps America together right now?
You raise an excellent point, and I have for years written it's in my site, it's in the post section, about revisiting the Declaration of Independence, specifically that red states, again, the wrong color, but let's stick with red states, who tend, as you rightfully say, favor smaller government, constitutional government, a representative government instead of an unelected, unaccountable, tenured, too powerful bureaucracy, the deep state, if you will. That the red states, which also tend to be more rural, have more energy, have more agriculture, more of American traditions, all right, that they maybe are so different today from the blue states, Oregon, Washington State, California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, that there really is such an unbridgeable or a cliff between us that it would perhaps behoove the country to split into two or perhaps more parts. And I personally think that the bureaucrats and the coronacrats and our oligarchs or plutocrats, the Davos crowd, is too well orchestrated in order for us to live under their tyranny without feeling slighted, without feeling as if we were serfs or new members of their big plantation. So I agree with you. I think there's a rising tendency and a growing argument that America should perhaps split into a constitutional set of states, and the other states can pursue progressivism, which is a code word for socialism and fascism and ultimately communism. Let them go there if that's where they want to be, and let's try to have a velvet divorce. But as you know, divorces can be very messy, and as long as people are still have enough to eat and are too comfortable, they're not going to go there. But ultimately, this is where it might go. In fact, I think that would be a good thing, however sad it would be.
And luckily, I don't know how divorces go, but not personally. I mean, Dan, I want to ask you now about what's been happening in the last 8-9 months in terms of the debt. It seems that the national debt has now become abstract. It's not even something that people can really understand. 27, 28 trillion dollars, and etc. There's obviously many camps in the debate of how dire the situation is. Is it dire? Will something happen immediately? Will something happen down the road, etc.? Where do you stand on this topic of the national debt? And do you personally prepare for a real problem that is not 20 years ahead, but within the time and scope that you can prepare for right now?
Yeah, those are great questions. It's more or less not a question of if, Lior, as you well know, but when. I had a discussion this morning with a colleague, and she said, look, so many people are hurting, the system's so broken, we have disincentives and instead of incentives. We don't have free market capitalism. We have cronyism morphing into fascism, possibly into communism if Biden gets in. What are you going to do? Well, Leo, the only way that I know of getting out of debt isn't to take on more debt any more than a drunk is going to get better by drinking progressively more alcohol. And we're at the point now where our debt numbers, and there's been studies on this, and families know it, and companies know it, and counties know it, and states know it. No matter how you look, we've borrowed from the future and we've encumbered ourselves. And this has been possible thanks to the magic of the printing press, where central banks just buy up all this debt, hoover it up, which otherwise wouldn't be buyable, and people would assign a much higher interest rate to it to cover for default risks, to cover if central banks print money for monetary inflation risks, which in essence is a piecemeal default. But up to this point in time, this trend of ever more central bank intervention, in essence, unnaturally low interest rates, and buying debt that otherwise would never be bought if there was price discovery, certainly not at these low yields, which give us negative real yields. At some point, confidence is broken. If you sustain insanity long enough, at some point you run out of runway. And I think we're closer than ever to this. And in fact, with the world going progressively further away from sound money, price discovery, capital formation from Main Street, which is robbed of capital when only the big companies get access to it when it's printed. All these things suggest that, especially if Harris becomes president, and I say Harris on purpose, we're going to just accelerate in our path of economic and societal destruction, which will create even more money printing to fill ever-growing deficits and higher debt loads. So we're speeding. The more socialist we become, the less productive we are, the more debt we create, the more money printing we need in order to make that debt serviceable. Because look, you mentioned $27 trillion of debt. That's about 1.45 times GDP in America. If you take all the debt at all levels, it's over 80 trillion. That's something like 4 times GDP. If you take global debt, it's over 255 trillion, which is something like 3 times 85 or 86 trillion dollars in global output. Just last year in 2019, prior to this coronavirus policy disaster, the world added $10 trillion in debt in 1 year. We are at the point of no return in terms of ever paying this back. Yet on the other hand, what is debt? One man's liability is a pension fund's asset, right? And pension funds buy around the globe obligations, debt, bonds, if you will, more than they do stocks. So if we have this debt emancipation or forgiveness, which people are always referring to, well, we might have made the creditors whole, but we're going to shaft the savers, the providers of capital, and the pensioners as well. So we're really in a difficult place. It always blows up historically, and I don't think we're going to get away from it this time. I think this time the difference is it's a global phenomenon. It isn't just Canada in trouble or Sweden in trouble or a developing nation. The whole world is up to its eyeballs in debt, and the answer has been the printing press. But when you engage in endless currency devaluation or debasement, at some point, confidence is going to be lost. People are going to rush into assets that can't be printed, especially vital assets in the agricultural and the energy arena. And they're going to buy real money, physical gold and silver, as an insurance policy against currencies that are worth a lot less, that lose their buying power more rapidly as people flee them to get into tangible assets. That progression, like we had in the stagflationary 70s, will, in my opinion, bring about a stark acceleration in the money multiplier when you marry that with this huge increase in the size of central bank balance sheets. You've got the traditional definition of inflation: too many fiat currency units chasing too few services and goods. And where that then goes and how you put the genie back in a bottle is very, very difficult indeed. So I think investors need to prepare for that. And when could it happen? Well, confidence, you know, we all know, if you trust someone or an entity or a country or a government that's been good or reliable, and 2-3 times over it proves that it isn't reliable, it isn't good, it might be even demonic, then all of a sudden trust gets lost all at once and it feeds on itself. And then there's hell to pay. And with all the debt and the falling productivity and the diminished property right protections, which will only get worse under the socialist regimes coming in, we're not going to be in a very pleasant place.
Very interesting, Dan. I want to ask you, where can people check out more of your posts and work and your ideas?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's dkanalytics.com. I publish there posts, videos. I'm publishing a bit less than I have, given other things that I'm doing. But once in a while, I put pen to paper, or I open up my mouth and say something that is hopefully half intelligent half the time. Hopefully, this is one of those occasions. We'll see. But yeah, thanks for asking. That's where my posts and my videos can be found on DK Dan Kurz. I got very creative there. Analytics.com.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you, Leor.